Yeah. So no matter how bad his position is, he'll find resources. He'll always look for the positives, as we saw yesterday against Anish, bouncing back from adversity. And here we go. The games have started. White pushes the queen's pawn, Aronian's favourite move traditionally. Which opening will we see? Nimzo India defence. Yeah, it's a Nimzo. Black's bishop coming out, pinning one of the white knights. And, OK, the classical variation. And a very strategic approach from Aronian. This one's gone out of fashion a bit lately from the white side. Black is supposed to have a few antidotes to this setup. Here, Black can bring one of the knights out. Black can just castle the king. Black can capture a pawn in the centre. Lots of options. White just wants to fianchetto his bishop and then get the king castled as quickly as possible. It's always kind of... I always think of it like a hybrid, this opening. A Nimzo Indian and a Catalan mixed up all in one. Simon, Jovanka, what do you think of this opening choice by Aronian?
Yeah, I guess he's going for a more positional approach, which I think is correct against Duda. Duda's very sharp, loves attacking, and I think there was a lot of battles. Kasparov, Karpov went there in maybe the '88 World Championships or in this opening. And this is all theory so far, and we see that Black now, capturing there, going to double the pawns, but White does have this lovely light square bishop, and Black's got this horrible light square bishop. So this is one of the positional reasons that White plays this line. On the other side, White's going to have double pawns. So, but there's been what, tens of thousands of games in this, or thousands at least.
Yeah, there's been very, very popular, and now White has reached a crossroads. This is why Levon Aronian has taken a pause. You can actually capture that bishop with the pawns, double your pawns, as Simon suggests, but it's also possible to capture that piece with a bishop. But OK, Levon still treading the main line, and now play is just developing very naturally, both sides getting their kings to safety. And OK, this one is slightly unusual. I mean, it could just simply change into something more popular, but it was actually a lot more popular in this position to attack the pawn with the knight, go to the edge of the board.
Yeah, as far as I know, this has definitely fallen out of fashion. What Duda's doing, at least, capturing this knight a couple of moves ago, doubling the white pawns, looks very logical. But nowadays, players from the black side, they've been choosing slightly different ideas. And I guess we have to jump in and discuss, because this is already long-term. It's going to be complex now. It's all about these pawns. Jovanka, you mentioned already on the last move, Black could go and start attacking the front of the doubled pawns. This one's really hard to defend, often in the Nimzo Indian defence. And already, White might be asked to sacrifice this pawn in order to get some dynamic compensation. Instead, in the game, he's pushed a pawn forward. These guys are still weaknesses. The black bishop maybe wants to come out and attack this pawn at some point. And Levon Aronian, I was about to ask, what should he be playing here? He needs to be energetic, right, to compensate for this structural weakness. So he jumps in with his knight. Very concrete, very kind of direct from Aronian. Looking at this knight now with his bishop, that's why the knight swapped itself off for a bishop. And, OK, a trade of knights on this square. And I guess Aronian's idea is to play this position. At least now both sides have these kind of weird doubled pawns. Who's this going to favour? It's not clear to me, to be honest. The question is, can White kind of correct his pawn structure? If he can force Black to take in this manner, then suddenly White has the advantage because he has a nice pawn centre. But if Black doesn't capture in the current position, maybe he can put pressure on this pawn. Maybe he just defends, moves his queen out, for example, keeps the tension. Very complex. All the knights off the board.
Well, I bet they don't want rooks and queens in that line then. Because that's not going to be very open anytime soon, I guess. No.
I guess White wants to just bring the rooks across. Yeah, it's unclear at the moment. I'm really surprised that both sides have played so quickly up to this point, because Black was taking some big strategic risks, and then Levon Aronian just said, OK, I'm not going to try and punish you, I'm just going to swap off all the pieces.
Yeah.
What do we think of that decision?
Yeah, I mean, has it ever been played?
No, it's not been played before, but I think it's part of the player's strategy to just maximise the tension. You know, there's a lot of pressure in the centre, you know, there's a lot of possibilities there, and now... my mind has gone blank a little bit. Aronian, it's Duda. This is I just got a bit put off by Richard Rapport's face.
Say that again. You got put off by Richard
Rapport's face. Because I can just see underneath there's a picture of Wei Yi and Richard Rapport. So I lost momentum because I was thinking Richard, but it's not Richard, it's Duda. Stepped forward with the Queen. And there we see the players getting ready. And, you know, earlier on we talked about the semi-finals. It's all going to be about mental strength. It's also going to be about drama and what they're going to bring to the chessboard. And, you know, the heat is on, the party's getting started, and this is like the perfect time to launch our selfie competition because we want to know how you at home are watching the tour. And there is a prize up for grabs. So one lucky winner will win 1 year's Chess24 premium membership for free. And of course, as always, you can tweet us your selfies, remember, in landscape mode, using the hashtag ChessChamps, and we will feature them on the show.
Absolutely. Love seeing your selfies.
Yeah, we love seeing selfies, and personally, I love seeing queen exchanges. It means we'll go down to an endgame, and the players will grind it out. But what do we think of this offer of a queen trade? Does black say yes, or does black run away? If you capture the white queen, you double another set of pawns.
Yeah, I mean, I think in these positions, it all depends whether black can play bishop to a6 at some point. I think he has to exchange queens and he has to play this move. Without this move, black's just going to be very defensive in a bad position. And we're going to get actually lots of simplifications here over the next couple of moves. And I think it's going to be clear to see very soon if I'm sure it's white who's pushing for an advantage, if white will be able to get an advantage out of the opening. And, OK, black's playing a very natural move there, bring the rook to d8. He played that very quickly. Again, David, you're mentioning how quickly they're moving. It's one of those positions where, come on, maybe just slow down, because if you play it a bit quickly here, it's going to be a very simple position where you could just be worse. And there are other options there. You know, you could attack the bishop there, surely. That looked much more natural to me. So I'm wondering, you know, that last move, it might be OK. But what happens here? I mean, white's got 2 pawns on pre. It still actually seems OK for black, doesn't it, at the moment? I think. So, yeah.
White is temporarily a pawn up, so Levon will be looking for ways to consolidate that. I'm not really sure how, to be honest. Like you say, there are 2 pawns attacked in the current position. If we jump in, just to show what's happening here, white did win a pawn on this square. But as you mentioned, bishop takes pawn, big threat, and pawn takes pawn, followed by a rook recapture. Lots of pressure on this pawn in the centre. And the only way I can see to defend both is to, there we go, the Irish pawns, tripled pawns, but at least temporarily white is 2 pawns up, and black can only gain 1 back at a time. So you can capture this pawn, which actually looks very tempting, because the black bishop gets into the position, attacking this guy. The other option would be to play pawn takes pawn on this square, but white could just retreat the bishop, and suddenly no captures. Because this would lead to a really bad rook and pawn endgame for black. Just a pawn down, and white has an outside pass pawn, potentially. So I guess this is possible, but then he would just flick his bishop back. Instead, wow, he goes for an approach I hadn't considered, to be honest. In this position, he just says, OK, I'll be 2 pawns down, I don't mind. Just going to sidestep back where he came from. That's really interesting, Simon. You mentioned coming to this square 1 move ago. He plays it now. I guess all the targets lie here. But it does allow this move.
I think just a couple more moves, David, and we will be able to give a very good verdict. Like, OK, probably here, white's going to play a4, and we can slow down now. And like, if anyone's got an advantage, it must be white, because he's got that extra pawn, which gives him an extra tempo to do something with, like trying to get his rook into the game. But, of course, there's a lot of pieces being exchanged here, so a draw must be something that comes to mind as well, right?
Yeah. Rook endgame, it will be level number of pawns. Duda didn't actually take this pawn yet. He just doubled up first. He will take this pawn next. Yeah, as you say, Simon, it should be a draw with best play.
Remind me why we picked this game?
But is it so easy? I mean, for instance, white does have that time, as Simon highlighted, just to cause a little bit of a nuisance. You know, you kind of highlighted with your Irish rook coming to the D line and perhaps to the 7th row, and then, you know, maybe he will try to involve the A-rook into the game.
Yeah, for example, rook takes pawn, the white rook comes up, say black's rook tries to fight for the 7th rank, and now you advocate just bringing the other rook across. Yeah, potentially. I guess it's hard to imagine black being in too much trouble if the king, for example, just steps across. The king will try and come across and evict the white rook from this strong square.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like anything to me, really. Yeah, I mean, black doesn't really have any weaknesses, does he, except for the activity of white's pieces, and it's going to be very hard to win this when you don't have a weakness as black. This is kind of the only idea which white can try, I think, to get a rook active. OK, he's gone. He's gone with this move here.
Interesting.
OK, so this is actually maybe a clever way of doing it, right, David? So, yeah.
Defending this pawn, if it's captured, then we would see a rook trade. And now white does gain a bit of time because suddenly there's a threat of checkmate on the board. Black's king is actually trapped. And if you take a time out to deal with that, say the black king moves towards the centre or gets some breathing space, then white does get the rook to the 7th rank. This is the key. You need the rook now to hit this pawn. So if you win this pawn, some chances, very good chances for Aronian.
Very clever move there from Aronian, I think, because he now obviously has the opportunity, if he gets one more move, to defend that extra pawn, you know, a minimum, or to bring the rook to the open file. So, yeah, there's actually, you know, I missed this move, but this is going to ask some questions to Duda, whether he can keep the balance here. I mean, everyone's great at endings at this level, but Aronian just has so much experience, doesn't he? Yeah. I've seen him win so many rook endings against 2800s even in the past, and well, maybe not 2800s, there's not many of them about, but 2700s, let's say.
I remember him playing Magnus in some rook end games.
And playing, yeah, and he's very, very, yeah, he's up there with Magnus as one of the best endgame players around. So maybe there's something here. Maybe a little nibble, as we say.
What is the most common endgame?
Rook
and pawn endings,
Okay.
By a mile.
Yeah, because they start in the corner, don't they? And they're like slugs, really. You know, they come into life later on, but they just creep around in the corner for most of the game. You know, just doing nothing, and then off they go, like now. And they're very, very powerful in the ending. So yeah.
I do say all rook end games are drawn, but yeah, hopefully not this one. We'll see some action.
Quite like that tweet there from Grandmaster Blunders, who says, "I'm working." And keep those selfies coming in. Remember, there is a prize up for grabs: 1 year Chess24 Premium membership.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. Well, Duda is definitely thinking 2 minutes on this move. So is he now looking at, should I take this into something drawish? I think a rook endgame is going to be a draw, or do you think he can find something?
Yeah, it's difficult. As Simon mentioned, there is this kind of flaw in the plan. If you go and regain your pawn right now, if black does capture this black pawn, this white pawn, as we just showed. So if you don't take that pawn, if you just sit, maybe, for example, bring the black king towards the centre, you're basically saying, I'm going to be a pawn down for the next 20, 30 moves. And yes, it should still be a draw because black's rooks are active, attacking pawns. The white rooks will be passive, defending pawns. So probably it's just a draw. But from a kind of psychological point of view, do you want to sit there a pawn down, knowing that you are the one fighting for the draw? You are never going to win the game. So it's just Duda, I think, having that kind of chat with himself, that philosophical chat, and he decides, OK, I can't grab the pawn back. So Aronian's going to be a pawn up for a long time now. But the black rooks do control a whole bunch of squares. White has a lot of weaknesses, to be honest, as well. Yeah. Even if, OK, the rook comes across, even if the white king tries to centralise later, white has an isolated H-pawn. Yeah, it's going to be difficult to win this one for Aronian, but he is the only one who can win it.
But I think Lev is being very sneaky with his rook moves. You know, he's overprotecting the pawn standing on b5. And, OK, he quickly plays the move that I was thinking. And now, I mean, isn't this a little bit uncomfortable?
Maybe.
And Duda says, no.
Duda doesn't seem scared, does he?
He's not. Okay, look at him. You know, the light is shining on his face. It's always a good sign.
Yeah,
and
the light shines on the righteous. And on Duda.
Yeah, and the problem for white is, OK, after this pawn trade, everything's just disappearing, and black is going to take one of the white pawns now. There we go. white goes a pawn up again, but after a rook exchange, we will see a structure where, okay, he doesn't trade a set of rooks. Really interesting. I was going to say he could take one of the white rooks, go behind white's extra c-pawn with his remaining rook, and that should be a draw, that type of position, but he keeps both sets of rooks on the board.
It kind of looks dead draw to me. I mean, I think he's going to win a pawn back, isn't he now? I mean, he attacks one pawn, and I think Duda's actually defended quite cleverly. I mean, you know, very important to remember in ending that activity of the rook is the most important thing, and if you're a pawn down, it doesn't always matter if you can keep your rooks active, which Duda has done. And is he going to win a pawn back here? I mean, maybe not actually as clearly as I thought. I thought he was going to come behind that c-pawn, but he can't do that after Aronian's last move. So still, Aronian keeping some pressure, I guess.
Yeah.
Some.
I was going to say, you know, I might eat my words or something, but I do think it's not that easy for Duda. I don't think he's fully neutralised White's pressure just yet. And by pressure, I mean, basically, White just has to hold the position tight, defend the pawn that's under attack, and at the right time, bring the king to the defence of the weak pawn, and then he will be able to release a rook.
The problem is, anytime your king centralises, this is a huge weakness on the h2 square. So first, black's rooks are just too active, hitting the e2 pawn now. And if the white king steps across to defend, yeah, black goes on the attack against this guy, isolated and a weak pawn, simply. So I guess white has to step this pawn forward, but suddenly this black rook is so strong. I can envisage, for example, okay, he does move his king across, but I could envisage the black pawn stepping forward. If we see a trade on this square, suddenly this is a check. Suddenly black's rooks are really creating some menacing threats. So yeah, here already the evaluation bar is slightly in black's favour, despite being a pawn down. So if we go back to the current position, is it because of a move such as the rook coming across? Is it because black can, for example, bring his rook to this file? Does he push a pawn just to open up lines for his rooks? Either way, it feels like black is doing decently. The problem for white is this pawn's so far away from pushing. Even if you push forward, it's going to be hard to defend this pawn long term. White's rook, meanwhile, is so passive. Feels like Duda should be okay. Still, as Levon mentioned, some accuracy required to win back your pawn or kind of simplify things favourably. But he is capable, Duda, and he's got so much time, nearly 10 minutes, to find a key move. Okay, he does bring his rook across. That's slightly surprising. Just waiting. What is the idea there?
I mean, his rooks are still so good. I mean, this is where his compensation is, Duda. I mean, White's rooks are not great, but yeah, you're right. That move is a little bit mysterious. It doesn't have a clear idea, does it? That I can see. And
he just wants to attack this pawn and win it, I guess.
Yeah, maybe keep it as simple as he can.
But do you think, because some of the lines that David highlighted actually seem to be very uncomfortable for White, maybe he's kind of not in the mood to kind of put pressure on Lev, and instead is deciding just to equalise the game?
I think he'd love to get a draw here and just get this game out of the way, and Aronian's probably, you know, feeling it's probably a draw, but he's going to keep playing. So still something there, isn't there, for White? Because you do have that pawn. I mean, yeah, I'm still trying to find the right move for Aronian here. It's not easy, is it, to see how he can defend that pawn? Because if he loses that pawn, they can shake hands straight away.
Even if Levon has those double pawns, that doesn't really matter.
Yeah, not right now. I mean, if one set of rooks leave the board, it won't be a factor. For example, if White just makes... OK, I guessed the move correctly. That's good. But for example, OK, White's idea is to drop his rook back and defend this pawn. But even if he just lets it go and we see a trade, then this set of doubled pawns is not really a factor because they can easily be defended, both of those two pawns. They would be a real issue if black, for example, had a knight or a bishop around to jump and attack or utilise these weak light squares. But that's the problem with rooks. You can't really utilise weak squares like you can with minor pieces. So, yeah, if that pawn disappears, then structurally, this is not an issue for White. In the current position, maybe it's a small issue just because it's not really about these pawns being weak because they can be defended, but it's more about this guy being isolated. So it's just about whether to switch the attack and go for that pawn.
I was wondering about that move, David. I mean, but that seems very double-edged. I mean, if the rook does, as you say, swing over, I mean, the first thing I'd think of here, let's just try to queen a pawn and not worry about it. And does black have enough counterplay on the king side here, because that pawn is so strong. When you've got a passed pawn, as white does here, if you've got a rook behind that passed pawn, it increases in value a lot. So this would become very sharp, wouldn't it, all of a sudden, with a lot of danger, especially to Duda. I mean, he has to stop that pawn. I don't see how he can easily do that here. So it's not. He has to be a bit careful, right?
Rook takes pawn is just met by white's king shuffling across, gaining time against the rook. Rook runs away, and then you motor forward, and only 3 squares away. So in the current position, definitely it feels like Duda is reluctant to move away the blockader of this pawn. First, he goes back, attacking the front weakness, the front double pawn, stepping a pawn forward now to defend it. And Duda says, OK, now you've weakened your second rank, I'm going to go back. And now this is potentially a target. If you imagine both black's rooks landing on the second rank, that would be disastrous for white. But in the meantime...
He hasn't won that pawn back, though. I mean, it's you know, Jovanka, I think I'm sort of going more your way now that, OK, it is a pawn. I think it's still very hard to win because black's rooks are very good, black's very solid, and I don't know if white can make any progress, but it is a pawn now. It seems to be a safer extra pawn, right?
So it's up a little bit.
Yeah.
Feels like Duda's just playing a bit too quickly. He could maybe invest just 3 or 4 minutes here, or on the last few moves he would have found a way to win the pawn back or find a direct path to a draw. But yeah, it feels like he's drifting very slightly. He's very confident here, clearly, that Duda, that he thinks he can just draw this game. But yeah, as you guys say, the longer this pawn survives, the greater white's winning chances are.
Now, double pawns, they obviously got a very bad rumor after Queen's Gambit. Is it deserved, or can double pawns be, you know, if not good, maybe not as bad as the Queen's Gambit says they are?
I think there's different levels of double pawns as well. So there's kind of doubled isolated pawns. So, for example, here, white has double pawns on the f-file, but white also has a pawn on the e-file to kind of next to those pawns to protect them. So they're not that weak. They do control a lot of squares, those 2 white pawns. They take away squares from the black rooks. We saw yesterday, it was in a game from Richard Rapport where he won very nicely. He had doubled pawns as black, but they covered so many central squares that actually they were really a strong point in his position, if anything. So I think double pawns are only weak if they can be attacked, or if it comes down to a pawn race, then kind of having 2 pawns on the same file is a bit clumsy. It doesn't really help in a race, but I don't know, there's some dynamic compensation for them.
Definitely, because there's an open line, isn't there? So I always judge them by how well they can move. If they can't move forward so easily, and there are a lot of pieces controlling the squares in front, then maybe they're a little bit of a liability. But then again, you've got to balance that out with all the dynamic possibilities that you get because of this open line. And here, as David mentioned earlier, you know, the rooks just can't make use of those weak squares that surround the pawns. So here they're just absolutely fine. They're protected. They can't be won easily. And I don't think they're neither good or they're neither bad.
Normally, when you get double pawns, you often get something else in return anyway. So here, by getting the double pawns, Aronian actually won a pawn in the process. So he's 1 pawn up. He would rather be a pawn up with double pawns than level material without double pawns, if that makes sense. And often, in order to double your pawns, your opponent has to, for example, trade off a bishop for a knight, so you get the bishop pair, or you get something, like Jovanka says, you get an open file in return. There are often kind of extenuating circumstances. So you just don't want double pawns in a position where they can be attacked easily, blockaded.
I was just looking at this position. I was just thinking, if black doesn't do anything, how can white win? And I've just come up with one plan, but I really can't see, like, any way. This is a good way to look at positions. You know, how can you improve your position, right? If your opponent doesn't do anything, and in some rare cases, it's best not to do anything. You know, literally just to sit there and say to your opponent, "Come on, I'm just going to like read a book here or something. Chill out. You've got to do something." And the only thing I can think of is maybe the rook on d4 can come to c3 and come to c2 or something. Is that a possible idea to improve the position? Because you want to sort of improve the position slowly, right, in these kind of things. And I think I'd love to swap a pair of rooks. It's probably still a draw, even if I do that. But, you know, any way to improve. And Maybe I push the h-pawn 2 squares first to, just to improve my position over there, because that's always a good move, isn't it? But in general, maybe is that a plan, David? Maybe to do something like that. So.
You called it, Simon. Harry the h-pawn marches forward. But also notice how strong the 2 double pawns are. That actually Duda spent a move trying to prepare a plan to exchange off the double pawns and kind of rectify white structure. Especially this white pawn, really strong. But yeah, to answer your point, Simon, so for example, black just waits, does nothing. You mentioned bring the rook back, black waits, bring the rook across, black waits, and then offering a rook exchange. It makes some sense because a rook trade.
I want to try to give myself the opportunity as white to bring my king towards the passed pawn, which I couldn't do before because black's rook was so strong on the position, so I've swapped off my opponent's strongest piece, and that's what I'm aiming for. But even here, the double pawns, well, you're leaving Harry weak, aren't you? This is always the problem, as you pointed out. So black, if the king comes over, black will be able to pick up that loose pawn minimum. And even this, I mean, this doesn't seem, that worrying for black. And black maybe is just waiting now.
Yeah.
So
that's really interesting, a plan like that one. I think another idea that I'd be tempted by with white, in the game position, is to activate this rook at some point. For example, swing it across, try to creep in through the 7th rank. So, for example, if black gets greedy and goes for the white extra pawn, then we can give a check. Wherever the black king goes, then we can suddenly dive in and you conquer the 7th rank. This is a checkmate threat, actually, if you win this pawn. So this would be very, very nice for white. I'm just wondering how Duda would meet a move like that one, trying to bring the rook across. Maybe he'd just retreat his own rook.
Yeah, that was also my thinking as well, David. Just to retreat the rook and hold tight.
I wonder if you can push the pawn there. I mean, I don't know. It seems quite risky. Oh, you just come behind, right? Yeah, doesn't work.
Somehow, like, white needs 2 moves in a go, and then it will be OK. But for the time being, I mean, at the minute, this is just what is a grind. Objectively, the position is probably a draw. But, they have to play it. They have to find those accurate moves. And this is what makes endgame so exciting.
Is this one of those typical Magnus Carlsen positions where he would... as white.
This would make it into David's course.
Yeah.
If white wins this one, it's the David's course position, isn't it? 100%.
We know Aronian can grind this one down.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, a really odd move, guys. The king has come forward. So what happens if white... he just moves his king. I was going to say, what happens if white tries this plan now, going to the 7th rank, going for this pawn? Because black can say, yes, I'm going to win this pawn, but suddenly we go across, we come up, and we win this guy. Bit of a strange one. Is that a small missed opportunity, perhaps? I'm really surprised the black king abandoned the 7th rank there.
Yeah, I'm surprised as well, especially because he seems to... And he's left the king...
Done it again.
...on the f6 square, and it really is just asking white...
And look at the evaluation bar. Yeah. Maybe the white rook can just come to the 7th rank. This is actually the big target in the black position. And, OK, again, Aronian, he's in grind mode. He doesn't want to do anything kind of concrete. He doesn't want to kind of seize the moment yet. He just wants to improve his pieces. I'm not sure how this improves the pieces, to be honest. But the problem is the chance is gone. Black's king steps back and white's rook can no longer enter on the 7th rank.
Yeah.
He's making useful moves, but maybe not the most incisive moves.
I mean, he's got to do something, hasn't he, at some point as well? I mean, he's got to find some kind of plan. And I do like your idea of activating the rook, even if you lose your passed pawn, trying to transfer one advantage to the other. OK, he's gone back, so he's not...
Maybe your plan is in the air of doubling the rooks and offering a trade.
I suppose the big threat here is to come to B1 and come round that way, like we've just seen. OK, so this is a good move. And, yeah, we got this position I mentioned, but it's still actually very hard for white to progress here, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, he has to bring in the king, doesn't he? And, OK, Duda taking a cautionary step backwards and very defensive, but I think it's necessary. And it's up to Levon to now find a plan to improve the position. And whilst the players are thinking, do I have time to share with you a few selfies?
Of course.
OK, he pushes his pawn forward. Jessica says that she is Okay, and the rooks have now lined up. She's watching some semi-final action with her fuzzy friends.
Ooh.
That's very nice. And
Is that Eevee and Growlithe and... Oh, there's a couple of Pokemon. What's the middle one?
Oh, we have a secret Pokemon.
I didn't even know that they
Follow
were
here.
okay.
Sorry. Yeah, let us know,
Okay.
Jessica. What's the middle one? My eyesight's not good enough to see.
Okay, well, Jessica, yes, let us know. And Abhishek tells us, you know what's tougher than beating a grandmaster in chess? It's managing to eat your ice cream cone completely without it being snatched by a seagull on Brighton Pier. Now, the funny story about that is actually I was walking with David in Llandudno and we were eating ice cream. And we're from nowhere. The seagull came and stole his ice cream.
Yeah, I have, well, it's not a love-hate relationship, it's just a hate relationship with seagulls. Oh my God, every time I have an ice cream, if the weather's even slightly warm, a seagull will poach it.
Really?
As Jovanka said, we just bought some really expensive ice cream. 1 minute outside the shop, seagull comes in. I recently queued up for 20 minutes at McDonald's to get a McFlurry. One step out the shop, seagull swooped in. McFlurries are not cheap in Norway.
You know, I'll join your We Hate Seagulls group on Facebook, David. I mean, they are just pooping all over my veranda. Have to clean it every day. I hate them.
David's got baby pigeons, I think.
Oh.
Yeah, I had a pigeon problem during the candidates tournament. I was commentating. I had to go and take a break to try and get rid. They'd laid an egg in my gutter.
No.
Yeah, it was a bit sad. We had to move the egg, and the pigeons were a bit upset. But yeah, these birds in the summer, they think they can get away with anything. But also, Abhishek in that tweet, Brighton, that's pretty much my hometown.
Yeah.
I lived there for 5 years as well, so down.
Nice part of the world.
Yeah,
Is that
it's good.
like a nice summer city in England?
It's a good place to have fun.
Yeah?
I reckon it's better than London. I'm going to say it. Yeah, I reckon it's a better place. Everyone goes to London, too busy, too hectic. Brighton's got loads of little lanes, great pubs. It's really cool. Yeah, Brighton's a great place to go. So, yeah. Don't know. Do you agree? London or Brighton?
Oh, Brighton, every time.
Brighton.
Yeah.
Come on, actually, Brighton football team, seagulls.
And meanwhile, let's go back to the game because, well, Duda has played this pawn move. I mean, is this just completely neutralising Levon's attack, or is it just one step too far in the defensive?
I mean, it feels like he's going through an identity crisis in a way, Duda. At first, he wanted to go active. Then he wanted to go passive and just sit there and do nothing. Now he's going active again by swapping off all these pawns. And, OK, Levon Aronian, he's got so much time on the clock, but he made a committal decision. He had so many options on the last go. We see more pawns leave the board, which is actually good for Duda. But if we just jump in a few moves ago, just when Duda pushed this pawn forward, Levon had options. For example, he could lock down the position, he could push this pawn, he could actually just keep another set of pawns on the board, he could move his king forward, potentially, saying, yes, you can grab here, but then the white king comes across, then I'm going to start grabbing your pawns. I don't know, to me this looks good, but yeah, so many options. I'm not sure which is the best, but he just very quickly took these pawns and very quickly moved forward.
I mean, if we compare the position, David, you know, that first move, I mean, just pushing the pawn one square forwards, like h5.
If we go back,
and then we could get the same thing as in the game, but maybe then that pawn's going to be weak. But I think generally you want to keep pawns on the board, right? Generally, if you want to win, you've got to keep more pawns on the board. The way the game's going, I mean, there's not many pawns you can queen. I mean, it's really simplified, even though you're a pawn up. I mean, obviously it's a draw technically, but be a bit careful, but still.
You're right. I mean, we skip ahead now back to the current position, and yeah, I mean, I just don't see how White is ever going to win this one. I mean, this pawn and this pawn basically balance each other out, and your only hope is this guy. Oh, sorry, me and my arrows. The only hope is this guy, but yeah, firstly, stepping it forward isn't going to be easy anytime soon. But secondly, yeah, you're going to have to face a whole bunch of checks. You don't have that much shelter for the white king. This is a check you have to block. You don't want to move because this would be nasty. So, OK, we did see a block. And after a rook trade, slightly surprising there, but
Does that
Duda...
favor Levon trying to push that pawn?
Usually, I would think so, but I guess because there's so few pawns left, Duda should be OK. He's going to try and use his king to blockade this pawn, potentially, and then his rook will be the active piece. You definitely want it that way round. You want your king passive, rook active. And, yeah, I think Black's rook is going to do a good job. if there were more pawns on the board, for example, if you imagine black had 2 pawns here, white had 2 more pawns here, I think white would have great winning chances just because this pawn would be a distraction, and then later white could try and create a second pass pawn. But yeah, just everything's disappearing, unfortunately. And okay, now all Duda needs to do is find a way, after he moves his rook, for example, across, he needs to find a way to trade off these guys, leave white with just 1 pawn that's easy to blockade, and it will be a draw. So, okay, he attacks this pawn instead. White will defend it with his king. And now Duda's idea is to block everything with the black king.
Okay. So you fully expect this to end in a draw. In what kind of way? Move repetition or something like that?
Yeah, maybe just everything being traded off. Actually, Duda brings his rook across. Yeah, I think there's just no progress to be made for white. At the moment, your rook is stuck defending this pawn. If you ever bring your king across, the problem is the rook switches back to attack this one. You bring your king back across, the rook switches back to attack this one. The black rook is basically going to oscillate between the current square and this square. It's just going to go back and forth, and white can do nothing. I think we'll see a result any moment.
Well, Levon Aronian with the white pieces. I guess it's Duda who will be the most happy about that result. After every game, they will have 15-minute break, and game 2 will start. It is best out of 4 rapid games in these semi-final matches, and if they are tied, then they will play Blitz and potentially Armageddon tie breaks.
I don't know what it is with the cameras, but it looks like Phantom of the Opera or something in Duda's.
Oh, it's very dramatic.
Looks like he's wearing half a mask or something.
Yeah. I'm just waiting for his... is he wearing a hoodie? Or is it, no, it's a T-shirt, obviously.
Yeah.
And here we go.
It should be a draw, shouldn't it?
Should be a draw.
Like, hopefully now. I mean, I think it's like quite a high standard game. And
Levon shaking his head.
yeah, I mean, I don't think Levon, he'd never really had any winning chances. I mean, he was always a little bit better, but so what, you know? And you get this kind of game, a lot of this, and now more pawns exchange, they can shake hands, they probably do. But, I mean, this is why sometimes, like, the high-level games, I find them a bit more boring than when there's more errors. You know, I know this is a bit controversial, but when you see very tactical games where the bar's going left and right, it's swinging all over the shop, I find them a bit more dramatic than these better played, better quality games in general.
You're not a true grinder, Simon.
I'm certainly not a grinder. I'm not. As you know, I'm a crash bang walloper. No grinding for me.
Crash bang what?
Walloper.
Walloper.
Wallop, like crash bang wallop. I think it's probably an English phrase, isn't it?
It is an English phrase. There's even a song.
Wallop.
Crash bang wallop, what a picture. What a picture, what a photograph.
I've never heard that bit, no. So,
what a joke.
Crash.
Blown off in a cloud, smoke, clap hands.
Is it a song? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, oh, okay. I don't know where I got it from.
I think. Well, I went to a southeast London primary school, and it was all so random. The education. We didn't do any maths. We didn't do any grammar. We didn't learn anything. But we seem to have learned songs from the. And we have a result, right? Because Levon has left his chair, and the position is just a draw.